We're all being lied to. Just let that sink in for a moment. AI is a distraction being pushed hard to hide the fact that we are stuck in a deep economic rut that nobody in power wants to admit is happening right now. Listen up, because what I am about to lay out for you might just change how you see the entire digital world we live in today, and why so many regular people are choosing to unplug entirely from the constant noise and surveillance. We have been fed this nonstop narrative that artificial intelligence is going to revolutionize everything, take all our jobs, and create some kind of utopian or dystopian future, depending on who you ask. But the truth is far more sobering, and it is time to wake up to what is really happening behind the scenes. The research and the actual trends out there paint a completely different picture, one that reveals AI as little more than a distraction and a tool for control, while millions of people are quietly choosing to step away from the digital madness and rebuild their lives in the real world. And if you stay with me until the end, you are going to see exactly why this shift is happening, how it connects to the failing economy, and how it could be the most liberating decision you ever make for yourself and your future. Now, if you are enjoying these Angry Guy videos and you want to show some support, you can buy me a Red Bull with a one-time gift or via a monthly pledge by using the link in the description of the video. The belief that artificial intelligence is going to sweep in and take over the world, along with the entire job market, eliminating nearly every form of work, has been sold to us nonstop for years. But if people simply pause and think for a moment, the whole idea falls apart under any real scrutiny. And the research backs this up completely. People were told almost 2 years ago that within 2 years, artificial intelligence would wipe out all coding jobs and eliminate almost all forms of work. Yet that prediction turned out to be completely nonsensical, because artificial intelligence can only be trained to handle very specific tasks, and it falls apart when it has to manage anything that requires true multitasking or genuine understanding across different contexts. Human beings and animals have always been specialists at different things, but none of us excel at everything. And that basic truth about life was pointed out clearly by one of the fathers of modern artificial intelligence, who understood that no single system can master every domain at once. Dogs, for example, have an incredible sense of smell that far exceeds anything a human can do. But humans possess other skills like complex reasoning and creativity that go way beyond what any dog could achieve, and the same principle applies across every living creature. So the fantasy that some form of artificial general intelligence will suddenly achieve what humans cannot and handle every possible task without limitation is highly unlikely at best. Companies that were supposedly going to stop needing coders 2 years ago are ironically still holding on to their experienced coders. And instead, the artificial intelligence tools are simply being used to accelerate the speed at which certain routine work gets done, work that would have previously been handed off to junior coders. But the reality is that vibe coding or generating code through prompts can never replace the judgment and deep expertise of seasoned professionals. Not today, and not 1,000 years from now. And the same pattern holds true across many different professional fields where the human element remains irreplaceable. Artificial intelligence cannot replace good accountants, because while it might help generate tax documents faster, a trained accountant must still review every detail with a fine tooth comb, since the Internal Revenue Service and banks will never accept the excuse that the machine made the error. So the responsibility falls squarely on the human professional who signs off on the work. Artificial intelligence also cannot replace people like roofers, electricians, and tradesmen, who are essential for ensuring that jobs are completed correctly and safely on site, where real world variables demand immediate human decision making and physical presence to avoid costly or dangerous mistakes. Artificial intelligence can only facilitate and speed up certain processes, but it cannot replace the trained people who bring accountability and hands on expertise to the table. and even in creative areas like animation, the full replacement has not happened because the rest of the production team does not have the time or skill to handle the animation side themselves. So, what we see instead is animators using artificial intelligence to assist in speeding up production, which has already become common in the anime industry, where human artists leverage the tools to boost efficiency without being pushed out entirely. The hard truth is that many companies have used artificial intelligence as a convenient excuse to fire employees and boost short term profits by trimming what they call underperforming staff while claiming the technology made the cuts necessary, when the actual research shows that artificial intelligence has yet to deliver any significant profits for the major tech companies that have poured billions into it, including heavy investors like Microsoft, who have seen limited returns on those massive expenditures. On the other side of the equation, people are rapidly fleeing the internet and online spaces to return to the offline world, where consumer sentiment around artificial intelligence remains extremely negative, with most people refusing to use it extensively or pay for it, and companies like Microsoft trying to force it into all of their products and services in hopes of making adoption mandatory, which has only infuriated users more and pushed many to abandon Windows entirely in favor of Linux or Mac systems that give them more control. The future is not some artificial intelligence dominated takeover, because artificial intelligence will simply exist as a new tool, much like the computer was before it, a tool that increases the amount of work people can complete quickly, but it will not replace actual employees on any large scale, and instead, it will create entirely new jobs that require even greater skill sets to operate and oversee the technology effectively. This shift is happening at the same time that people are moving further away from constant subscriptions and from artificial intelligence being used to surveil and collect private information about users. And instead, ordinary folks are choosing to walk away and go offline to touch grass again and reconnect with real life in meaningful ways. This is exactly why artificial intelligence functions as a psyop, because it was deployed by corporations and governments to explain away slowing job growth, when the underlying reality is that the economy is simply very bad, and artificial intelligence provides convenient cover to blame for the lack of new jobs while companies fire people and stop hiring almost anyone new. The truth is that we are living through a very bad job market, but the government and corporations are doing everything possible to hide the deep economic depression that has been grinding on for a long time. And all artificial intelligence is truly doing is accelerating the move toward reducing tech dependence in daily life, while pushing people toward greater decentralization from tech finance and even the way they source food and other necessities for survival and daily living. People are really just escaping from this increasingly artificial intelligence centered society and going offline, where they can breathe freely again without the constant pressure of algorithms and monitoring. People are walking away from the internet, away from modern tech, away from the modern world, and going back to an old world with old tech self sufficiency and a focus on living without constant surveillance, tracking instant gratification, consumption, and convenience. When the internet first went mainstream in the late 1990s to early 2000s, it still felt fresh, new, and exciting because there was no mass government surveillance. Companies were not tracking every single move. And the discovery of what existed online provided a genuine sense of wonder and excitement that made exploration feel worthwhile and full of possibility. Even early platforms like MySpace felt fresh, different, and messy in a way that encouraged real expression and connection. But then the corporations arrived, and the government arrived, and the slow shitification process began turning what was once open and vibrant into something closed off and controlled. Platforms that were once open to everyone became more restricted and centralized, with examples like Facebook often requiring identification, such as a driver's license, just to participate. And they started censoring any speech that did not align with their preferences. And that pattern quickly spread across emerging platforms like Twitter, YouTube, and many others that followed, turning the internet from a fun place to blog, communicate in forums, share ideas, and create art into a heavily monitored war zone of ideologies shaped by algorithms, corporations, and special interest groups that dictate what is acceptable. The internet also destroyed the basic concept of ownership because companies convinced people that streaming music, streaming movies, and even streaming games was more convenient than owning physical copies. They made it cheap and accessible at first, and then they shitified the experience by fragmenting content across new platforms so that consumers soon needed to subscribe to a dozen different services just to access their favorite movies, television shows, books, or music without any real sense of possession or permanence. The modern internet is built upon lies, surveillance, increasing control, and increasing monitoring, and it is actively damaging the lives of people, which is why there is a massive movement happening right now, where individuals are walking away from the internet and heavily limiting their interaction with it to protect their mental health and personal freedom. Companies are now pushing for operating system level age verification so that they can control what people are able to do on their computers and how they interact with the internet overall. And everything is framed as convenience when it is really about control, using apps like Uber or Uber Eats to travel and buy food, which trades independence for supposed ease. But once companies have users locked in, they raise prices, require subscriptions, and enforce policies like age verification that then demand biometrics to better identify, track, and trace every individual, making the user the product in a system designed for exploitation. People are waking up and walking away from social media that creates massive anxiety, stress, delusion, and mental illness, walking away from streaming platforms and subscriptions that demand ever increasing monthly fees just to own literally nothing, walking away from a world where constant monitoring follows you everywhere and a smartphone becomes necessary to participate in basic society. People are walking away from a reality where companies have conditioned everyone to use an app for simple tasks like ordering coffee or food instead of making it at home for a fraction of the cost and with far more satisfaction. People are tired of this world and they are returning to old tech because it gives them back control and peace of mind. They are returning to physical media, purchasing iPods that have replaceable batteries and new solid state drives, and using them to curate their own music libraries that remain completely offline, with no notifications interrupting the experience, no distractions from incoming messages like on smartphones, and no aggressive warnings about low battery on wireless headphones since they use wired ones instead. So the music belongs to them and cannot be taken away or altered by any company. People are turning to older video game consoles that are entirely offline, where the games are stored on physical disks and companies cannot revoke access or change the experience after purchase. People are choosing game emulation by owning the game files and playing them through emulators on their personal computers, which allows them to have more games than they could ever need without any surveillance or restrictions. People are learning self sufficiency again, how to build, how to create, how to deal with boredom, how to live without instant gratification, and how to read physical books again, which engages the mind in ways that screens never can. People are avoiding short videos that destroy attention spans by delivering quick dopamine hits because those formats drain energy, affect sleep mess with clear thinking, and damage memory over time. And more individuals are waking up to this pattern, doing deliberate dopamine detoxes, retraining their brains, and walking away from the centralized world of brain rot that keeps users hooked and unproductive. The future for many is now people returning to older tech, deleting streaming apps, building a network attached storage device, which is a dedicated file level storage server connected to a network that allows multiple users and devices to access, store, and share data from a centralized location without needing physical connections like universal serial bus cables. And unlike cloud storage, which relies on third party servers and monthly fees, a network attached storage functions as a private cloud where users own the hardware, maintain full control over data privacy, and avoid recurring subscription costs entirely. People will store media locally, watch it locally, avoid subscription fees, block out all services that force ads because advertisements are another form of control, and avoid services that require biometrics, identification, verification, or age verification. People are removing themselves from the dying modern tech world and becoming very intentional about how they interact with technology so that it serves them instead of the other way around. Even artificial intelligence is moving offline, where people run local models directly from their own devices instead of paying endless subscription fees to access platforms like ChatGPT indefinitely. And this approach keeps everything private and under personal control. The internet now sucks because it has become a place filled with brain rot, overrun by bots, artificial intelligence, and algorithms that control everything we see, think, and do, including our speech. And the thing is that speech and thought are deeply linked. So if authorities prevent people from daring to say certain things, then they effectively prevent them from thinking those things as well, which is why censorship and control over social media have become so aggressive and widespread. People are turning away from centralized money that is increasingly controlled and restricted through digital identification, and instead they are moving toward cryptocurrency, cash bartering, which includes trading skills for products and services, and precious metals like gold and silver for real tangible trade that cannot be frozen or monitored from afar. Many internet users are beginning to flee into private networks that they control, such as their own network attached storage devices, and also the dark web, the part of the internet that cannot be accessed through normal means and that is not controlled or centralized by governments or corporations. A space where freedom of speech still exists, where people can still trade files without fear of internet service providers tracking them, where companies cannot constantly market to them, where surveillance is much more difficult, and where ideas still live and thrive without interference. The future is offline for many people, along with decentralized networks and the dark web, because the centralized internet has become too toxic and manipulative to tolerate any longer. People are leaving the modern world behind and building a new world that mixes the best of the old world, like physical media, with smart innovations from the new world, like network attached storage devices for truly offline storage and access. People are walking away, focusing on self sufficiency, focusing on offline media, owning their music, owning their books, owning their video games, owning their movies and television shows, and most of all, owning their data without allowing private companies to control it, own it, or trade it for profit. People are abandoning the modern techno focused world for a new world where old meets new to create genuine freedom and independence that no algorithm or corporation can take away. This movement is gaining momentum because the promises of endless convenience have revealed themselves as traps that erode personal autonomy and replace it with dependency on systems that do not have our best interests at heart. And as more individuals experience the relief of stepping back, they share their stories organically, inspiring others to do the same without any top down pressure or marketing campaign. The economic reality underneath all the hype shows that job growth has stalled, not because artificial intelligence is so advanced, but because the broader economy has been struggling with inflation, supply chain issues, and policy decisions that prioritize corporate consolidation over widespread opportunity, and artificial intelligence serves as a scapegoat that distracts from these deeper structural problems while allowing executives to cut costs and report higher profits on paper. When you look at the data from major tech earnings reports, it becomes clear that the billions poured into artificial intelligence development have not translated into proportional revenue gains or productivity leaps across the board. Instead, the tools are being integrated in limited ways that support existing workflows rather than replacing entire departments. And this pattern repeats in sector after sector where human oversight remains mandatory for quality, safety, and legal compliance. Think about the construction industry for a moment, where blueprints might be generated faster with artificial intelligence assistance, but the actual building process demands skilled tradespeople who can adapt to site specific challenges, weather conditions, material variations, and safety regulations that no algorithm can fully anticipate or manage in real time. The same goes for healthcare, where diagnostic suggestions from artificial intelligence can speed up initial analysis, but doctors and nurses must interpret results in the context of a patient's full history, lifestyle, and emotional state factors that require empathy and experience no machine can replicate. Education follows a similar path with artificial intelligence, able to grade basic assignments or generate lesson outlines, yet teachers provide the irreplaceable human connection, mentorship, and motivation that helps students overcome obstacles and develop critical thinking skills beyond what any programmed response can offer. This limitation is not a temporary bug in the system. It is a fundamental aspect of how intelligence works in the physical world, where context, adaptability, and ethical judgment cannot be reduced to patterns in data alone. Meanwhile, the consumer pushback against forced artificial intelligence integration has been swift and widespread as people recognize the privacy costs and the often mediocre output quality, leading many to seek alternatives that restore a sense of ownership and simplicity in their daily routines. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. The return to physical media is not some nostalgic fad. It is a practical response to the fragility of digital access, where accounts can be suspended, content can be removed without warning, and prices can rise unpredictably, leaving users with nothing after years of payments. By contrast, owning a shelf of books, a collection of compact discs, or a library of game cartridges means the entertainment and knowledge remain available regardless of corporate decisions or internet outages, and that reliability brings a quiet satisfaction that streaming services have never matched. Building a personal network attached to storage setup further extends this independence by creating a home based server that streams content to every device in the household without monthly fees or data caps, while keeping sensitive files encrypted and inaccessible to outside parties. The process of setting up such a system encourages learning about basic networking data management and security, which builds confidence and skills that translate to other areas of self reliance like home repairs or gardening. As people invest time in these offline solutions, they rediscover the value of patience and deliberate effort because, unlike the instant results promised by apps and algorithms, real world projects reward steady progress and problem solving that strengthens mental resilience over time. Dopamine detox has become part of this lifestyle, not as extreme challenges, but as intentional breaks from the cycle of endless scrolling and notifications that fragment attention and leave people feeling drained and unfulfilled at the end of the day. By replacing short form video consumption with longer form activities like reading or hands on hobbies, the brain begins to regain its capacity for deep focus and sustained concentration, which improves everything from work performance to personal relationships. The psychological toll of the always online world has been well documented through rising rates of anxiety, depression, and sleep disturbances linked directly to the design of platforms that prioritize engagement over well being. And the walkaway movement represents a collective recognition that enough is enough. Individuals are choosing to curate their tech use intentionally, keeping only the tools that add real value while discarding the rest. And this selective approach leads to clearer thinking, more meaningful interactions, and a stronger connection to the physical environment around them. In the realm of finance, the shift away from centralized systems toward cryptocurrency, barter, and precious metals reflects the same desire for autonomy, because digital currencies controlled by governments or large institutions can be restricted, frozen, or devalued through policy changes, whereas assets held in hand or traded directly between people maintain their worth based on mutual agreement rather than distant algorithms. Private networks and the dark web offer spaces where ideas can circulate without corporate gatekeepers or government censors, allowing innovation and discussion to flourish in ways that the mainstream internet increasingly suppresses under the guise of safety or community standards. This decentralization is not about hiding from society, but about reclaiming the freedom to communicate and transact without unnecessary intermediaries who profit from every step of the process. As more people adopt these practices, the overall dependence on big tech diminishes, creating ripple effects that weaken the influence of surveillance capitalism and open the door to new models of community and commerce rooted in trust and self determination. The blending of old and new technologies in this lifestyle demonstrates that progress does not have to mean surrendering control. It can instead mean harnessing useful advancements while preserving the core elements of human experience that make life worthwhile, such as privacy, ownership, and the ability to disconnect when needed. Walking away is therefore not an act of rejection, but one of reclamation, where individuals take responsibility for their time, attention, and resources and build lives that align with their values rather than the demands of profit driven systems. The economic depression hiding behind the artificial intelligence narrative only makes this choice more urgent, because as job markets tighten and opportunities shrink, the ability to live with less reliance on volatile centralized structures becomes a form of practical resilience that protects against future uncertainty. Families and communities that embrace self sufficiency and offline capabilities find themselves better equipped to weather economic storms, since they control more of their essentials from food storage to entertainment and information access. The movement grows organically through word of mouth and shared experiences rather than flashy advertising, because the benefits are tangible and immediate once people experience the relief of reduced screen time, lower stress levels, and greater personal agency. Artificial intelligence will continue to evolve as a specialized tool, but it will never replace the human drive for connection, creativity, and independence that fuels real progress. And by recognizing it as the psyop it represents, we can focus our energy on the genuine solutions that lie in stepping back and rebuilding from the ground up. This path forward mixes the wisdom of past generations with the selective benefits of modern innovation, creating a balanced approach that prioritizes freedom over convenience and substance over spectacle. As the trends continue to unfold, it becomes increasingly clear that the real revolution is not in the machines, but in the quiet decisions of ordinary people to unplug, protect their minds, and live on their own terms. Look around you right now, and you start to see that the real economic pressure has been building for years in ways that no amount of corporate press releases or government statistics can fully disguise. Because when you strip away the headlines, the numbers on employment, quality, wages, and actual purchasing power tell a story of stagnation that has been dragging on far longer than anyone in power wants to acknowledge. And this is where the artificial intelligence hype machine steps in as the perfect scapegoat, allowing executives to claim that their layoffs and hiring freezes are forward thinking moves rather than admissions that the underlying economy simply is not generating enough genuine growth to sustain the old models of expansion. The sobering part is that this pattern did not appear overnight. It has been simmering through multiple administrations and market cycles, where productivity gains from technology have mostly flowed upward to shareholders, while everyday workers face higher costs for housing, food, and energy without corresponding income increases, and artificial intelligence gets trotted out as the reason why companies cannot afford to keep staffing levels steady, when the truth is that many sectors have been operating with leaner crews for a decade due to outsourcing, offshoring, and consolidation that prioritized efficiency metrics over human stability. You can feel it in the way small businesses struggle to find reliable help, not because machines are taking the roles, but because the cost of living has outpaced what entry level or mid level pay can support, leaving gaps that no algorithm can fill. And this quiet depression has pushed families to make tough choices, like delaying major purchases, cutting back on discretionary spending, or even moving in with relatives to stretch every dollar, which creates a feedback loop that slows down broader economic activity even further. What makes this particularly raw is how the narrative around artificial intelligence distracts from policy choices that have favored financialization over real investment in infrastructure, education, and local manufacturing. Because when trillions get funneled into speculative tech bubbles instead of tangible projects that create widespread opportunity, the result is a hollowed out job market where the remaining positions demand higher credentials and offer less security, and artificial intelligence becomes the convenient excuse for why things feel so tight when the deeper issue is a systemic imbalance that has been papered over with easy credit and optimistic forecasts. People sense this imbalance in their daily lives when they see friends and neighbors who once had steady careers now piecing together multiple gigs or side hustles just to cover basics, and the artificial intelligence story gets layered on top as if the machines are the ones responsible for the squeeze rather than decades of decisions that rewarded short term profits over long term resilience. And this realization is driving more folks to question the entire system and seek paths that do not depend on the next quarterly earnings report or the promise of some breakthrough technology that never quite delivers the widespread prosperity it advertises. The walkaway movement gains strength here because when the economy fails to deliver on its promises, people naturally look for ways to reduce their exposure to its volatility. And that means rethinking dependence on centralized systems that can be disrupted by distant boardroom choices or policy shifts that feel completely out of individual control. This is not some abstract theory. You can see it in the growing interest in community supported agriculture, where families buy shares in local farms to secure fresh food at stable prices, bypassing the unpredictable swings in supermarket supply chains that get blamed on everything from weather to global events, but rarely on the concentrated power of a few distributors who control pricing and distribution. It shows up in the way neighbors start sharing tools and skills for home repairs instead of calling expensive professionals every time something breaks, because that kind of mutual support builds a buffer against the kind of economic uncertainty that leaves people vulnerable when jobs dry up or inflation bites harder than expected. The psychological weight of living in this kind of prolonged uncertainty cannot be overstated because constant worry about making ends meet while being bombarded with messages that everything is fine or that technology will fix it all creates a low level exhaustion that wears down motivation and clarity. And the offline shift offers a direct antidote by removing the layer of digital noise that amplifies those anxieties through endless feeds of curated success stories and doom headlines designed to keep users engaged rather than empowered. When you step back from that cycle, the mind starts to settle in ways that allow for clearer thinking about what really matters. And this mental space becomes the foundation for making practical changes, like learning to preserve food through canning or drying methods that turn seasonal abundance into year round security without relying on grocery delivery services that add fees and dependencies. It is a straightforward recognition that true stability comes from skills and resources you control yourself, not from promises made by corporations whose primary duty is to their bottom line. And this awareness spreads as more people experience the relief of handling their own needs and seeing how it reduces the stress that comes from feeling at the mercy of systems that do not prioritize individual well being. You start to understand the depth of the control mechanisms when you consider how the modern digital infrastructure has been engineered to collect data at every turn, turning routine activities into opportunities for profiling and influence that go far beyond simple advertising. Because once your patterns of behavior, location, and preferences are mapped out, they can be used to shape everything from job opportunities to credit scores in ways that most people never fully realize until they try to opt out and find the barriers intentionally high. The sobering wake up is realizing that this data harvesting has become so embedded that even basic services now require agreements to share information under the guise of improving user experience, when the real goal is to create detailed dossiers that feed into larger systems of prediction and manipulation. And the response from growing numbers of people is to limit their digital footprint by handling more transactions in count cash or through direct trades that leave no electronic trail and therefore no way for distant entities to monetize or monitor those exchanges. This choice feels raw at first because it requires more effort than tapping an app, but the freedom it restores is worth it as it breaks the cycle where every purchase or search becomes another data point that can be sold or used to nudge behavior in directions that benefit the platform owners rather than the individual. Communities are rediscovering the value of face-to-face interactions that build real trust and support networks, because when you rely on digital connections alone, the relationships often stay surface level and fragile, subject to deplatforming or algorithm changes that can sever ties without warning. Whereas meeting in person for skill shares or barter markets creates bonds that withstand economic ups and downs and provide practical help when times get tougher. The raw truth is that this kind of local resilience has been eroded over decades by the convenience of online everything, which promised to connect the world, but often isolated people in their own echo chambers while making them dependent on corporations for basic social and economic functions. And the walkaway is a deliberate reclamation of that human scale living where decisions are made based on immediate needs and mutual agreements rather than distant policies or profit motives. You see it in the rise of tool libraries, where residents pool resources for everything from lawnmowers to woodworking equipment, reducing the need for each household to own duplicates and fostering a culture of sharing that cuts costs and builds cooperation in ways that no subscription service can replicate. The financial side of this shift reveals how centralized banking and credit systems have become tools of restriction because digital currencies and accounts can be frozen or limited based on arbitrary rules or political pressures, leaving individuals with few options when disputes arise. And this vulnerability drives interest in alternative stores of value, like physical commodities that hold worth independent of any single institution or government decree. Precious metals, for instance, have served as reliable mediums of exchange for centuries precisely because they cannot be printed or devalued at will, and people are incorporating them into smaller scale trades alongside skills and goods, creating hybrid economies that operate outside the full reach of surveillance and taxation systems that have grown increasingly complex and intrusive. The straightforward reality is that this decentralization does not happen overnight, but starts with small steps like setting aside a portion of income into tangible assets or learning basic repair skills that reduce reliance on finance replacements. And each step compounds the sense of independence, making the overall economic depression feel less threatening because your personal baseline is no longer tied so tightly to the larger system's performance. As these practices spread, the cultural landscape begins to change because fewer people are chasing the infinite scroll of status and consumption that defined the peak online era. And instead, they invest time in pursuits that deliver lasting satisfaction, like mastering a craft or tending a garden plot that provides both food and a connection to natural cycles that no screen can simulate. The mental health benefits emerge clearly here, as reduced exposure to the constant comparison and outrage cycles of social platforms leads to lower levels of anxiety and a greater capacity for sustained attention that improves everything from work quality to personal relationships. And this improvement is not hype, it is the direct result of removing stimuli that were designed to hijack attention for profit. You feel the difference in quieter evenings spent reading or conversing without notifications pulling you away. And that presence allows for deeper conversations that strengthen family and community ties in ways that counter the isolation so many experience during the height of digital dependence. The hybrid approach, taking shape, blends the best of past methods with selective modern efficiencies, because nobody is suggesting a full return to pre industrial living, but rather a thoughtful integration where technology serves human ends instead of dictating them. And this means using durable older devices for core functions while incorporating things like solar chargers or basic automation that enhance self sufficiency without creating new dependencies. For example, maintaining a small solar setup for powering essential offline equipment ensures continuity during grid disruptions that have become more common with aging infrastructure and extreme weather events linked to broader environmental shifts. And this preparedness turns potential crises into manageable inconveniences rather than catastrophes that leave people scrambling. The authoritative take is that this mindset shift from consumer to producer is the real game changer because it restores agency in an era when so much has been outsourced to specialists or machines. And the sobering part is how quickly that agency compounds once you start making even modest changes to daily routines. Censorship and narrative control on the remaining online spaces accelerate the walk away, because when platforms increasingly curate what can be discussed or shared under broad labels of safety or misinformation, people recognize the chilling effect on open inquiry and choose environments where ideas can be explored without fear of sudden bans or shadow restrictions that stifle genuine debate. The dark web and private networks gain appeal here not as hideouts but as sanctuaries for unfiltered exchange where information flows based on merit rather than corporate or governmental approval. And this freedom fosters innovation in everything from alternative education resources to peer reviewed technical guides that help individuals maintain their offline setups without relying on official channels that may have conflicts of interest. It is a raw acknowledgement that centralized gatekeepers have priorities that do not always align with public good. And the response is to build parallel structures that prioritize transparency and user control, which in turn strengthens the overall movement toward greater independence. This parallel development extends into how people source information and entertainment because owning physical copies or local archives means access is not subject to licensing changes or content purges that have become common as companies consolidate libraries and adjust availability based on profitability or external pressures. And the peace of mind from knowing your media collection is yours to keep and share locally cannot be overstated in a world where digital rights management can revoke access retroactively. Families benefit directly as children grow up learning the value of tangible possessions and hands on skills rather than ephemeral streams that can disappear, leaving behind only the habit of constant consumption. And this upbringing fosters a generation less susceptible to the manipulative patterns that defined earlier online natives who often struggle with attention and self regulation. The wake up call rings clear when you consider how these choices accumulate over time, creating households and communities that are more adaptable and less fragile in the face of economic or technological disruptions because their foundations rest on real capabilities rather than rented conveniences. Looking further ahead, the blending of old world reliability with new world ingenuity points toward a future where technology augments human freedom instead of eroding it. And artificial intelligence, if it matures at all, will likely find its place as a specialized assistant in controlled local environments rather than a ubiquitous overlord, because the practical limits of its capabilities become more apparent the longer it is deployed in real world conditions that demand adaptability and accountability beyond pattern matching. The depression era we are navigating may last longer than optimistic forecasts suggest, but the quiet revolution of people stepping back and rebuilding on their own terms offers a pathway through it that does not depend on waiting for some grand recovery or technological savior. And that self directed approach is what makes the current moment feel charged with possibility, even amid the challenges. Every individual who chooses to own more of their life reduces the power of the systems that have profited from dependence. And as those numbers grow, the collective shift creates new norms where self sufficiency and decentralization are seen not as fringe, but as sensible responses to a world that has overpromised and underdelivered for too long. You can almost hear the relief in conversations among those who have made the change because the constant pressure to stay connected and consume evaporates, leaving room for genuine rest and creativity that were crowded out by the demands of the always online lifestyle. And this restoration of personal rhythm leads to better physical health as well through more time outdoors or engaged in manual activities that balance the sedentary patterns so common in screen heavy routines. The straightforward truth is that the body and mind respond positively to these adjustments in ways that no supplement or app can replicate because they address root causes rather than symptoms. And the movement continues to expand precisely because the results speak for themselves without needing marketing campaigns or celebrity endorsements. As more sectors feel the pinch of the underlying economic realities, the appeal of reducing vulnerabilities through offline practices only increases, turning what began as individual choices into a broader cultural current that reshapes how we think about work, leisure, and security in the years ahead. The control mechanisms embedded in modern conveniences reveal themselves most clearly when you try to step away, because suddenly services that once seemed essential start demanding more verification or higher fees to maintain access. And this pushback only confirms for many that the trade offs were never as balanced as they appeared. With convenience masking deeper losses in privacy, autonomy, and long term affordability. Bartering networks expand in response as people trade labor or goods directly avoiding the transaction fees and tracking inherent in digital payments. And these networks often incorporate knowledge exchanges where one person teaches basic plumbing or sewing in return for help with gardening or vehicle maintenance, creating webs of reciprocity that strengthen community resilience without involving banks or platforms that take a cut at every step. The raw edge of this approach is that it requires trust and effort, but the rewards come in relationships that are more meaningful and systems that are less prone to sudden failure because they are distributed rather than concentrated in a few vulnerable points. This distributed model applies equally to energy use, where individuals adopt smaller scale solutions like wood stoves for heating or manual tools for certain tasks, reducing dependence on grids that have shown increasing unreliability amid rising demand and maintenance backlogs. And the sobering reality is that these grids are themselves products of the same centralized thinking that has led to economic fragility. So, diversifying energy sources becomes another layer of practical independence that pays dividends during outages or price spikes. People discover that many daily needs can be met with simpler methods that use less resources overall, leading to lower bills and a lighter environmental footprint without the guilt tripping often associated with top down green initiatives that ignore the practicalities of average households. The authoritative perspective here is that real sustainability emerges from bottom up choices made by informed individuals rather than mandates from afar. And the walkaway movement embodies this by focusing on what works in practice rather than what sounds good in theory. As these changes take root, the broader society begins to see a split between those who remain fully embedded in the digital consumption model and those who have carved out spaces of greater self direction. And the contrast highlights how the former group often faces higher stress and financial strain, while the latter reports greater satisfaction and stability, even in tough economic times. This divergence is not about judgment, but about observable outcomes that encourage more people to experiment with reducing their tech footprint and building skills that have enduring value regardless of market conditions or technological trends. And the momentum builds because each success story shared informally inspires others to try similar steps without needing formal programs or large investments. The future being shaped is one where human ingenuity and local cooperation take precedence over distant automation, and that shift feels like a necessary correction after years of over reliance on systems that promised ease but delivered fragility. And the quiet decisions happening now are laying the groundwork for that more balanced reality. You notice the change in how time feels when it is no longer fragmented by notifications and algorithms, because hours spent on meaningful tasks flow with a natural rhythm that brings accomplishment rather than the drained emptiness that follows binge scrolling. And this reclaimed time becomes available for strengthening personal bonds or pursuing interests that were sidelined by the demands of staying current in an endless feed of information. The mental clarity that follows allows for better decision making across all areas of life, from finances to health. Because the constant low level distraction of digital life had been subtly impairing judgment in ways that only become apparent after stepping back and experiencing the difference. Families that adopt these practices report stronger connections as shared activities replace isolated screen time. And children learn early that real engagement comes from doing things together rather than consuming content separately. And this foundation sets them up for greater resilience in whatever economic or technological landscape they inherit. The economic depression we are in has exposed the limits of growth models based on ever increasing consumption and debt. Because when wages stagnate and costs rise, the only way to maintain appearances is through more borrowing or cutting quality, which eventually reaches a breaking point, and the artificial intelligence narrative serves to delay acknowledgement of that point by suggesting that productivity miracles are just around the corner, when the data on actual output gains from these tools shows more modest incremental improvements confined to narrow applications. The raw truth is that many companies are using the technology to justify existing cost cutting trends rather than unlocking new value. And this misdirection keeps public attention focused on futuristic possibilities instead of present day policy adjustments that could address root causes like wage stagnation or housing affordability. People walking away recognize this dynamic and respond by creating their own value through self provision and local exchange, which insulates them from the boom bust cycles that have characterized the centralized economy for generations. And each step in that direction reinforces the sense that genuine progress lies in human scaled solutions rather than waiting for top down fixes. Decentralized networks, whether for data sharing or resource distribution, demonstrate that cooperation does not require massive intermediaries. And this lesson applies across domains as groups form to maintain community gardens or skill workshops that preserve knowledge outside institutional channels where curricula or access might be influenced by funding priorities or regulatory capture. The sobering aspect is how much practical wisdom had been outsourced or forgotten in the rush towards specialization and convenience, and the reclamation process revives capabilities that once formed the backbone of household and community independence, allowing people to face uncertainty with confidence rather than fear. As these networks grow, they create buffers against the larger economic pressures, making the depression less devastating for participants who have diversified their dependencies and built in redundancies that centralized systems often lack. This entire movement represents a collective course correction where ordinary decisions accumulate into significant change, because when enough people reduce their participation in exploitative or fragile structures, the influence of those structures diminishes, creating space for alternatives that better serve human needs. And the relaxed truth is that this does not require grand gestures or perfect plans, just consistent small choices that align daily life with values of ownership, privacy, and self reliance. The future unfolding from these choices mixes the durability of older approaches with the smart efficiencies of selected innovations, resulting in a lifestyle that feels both grounded and forward looking, where technology supports freedom instead of undermining it, and artificial intelligence remains a limited tool in the background rather than the center of attention. The wake up call is that we do not have to accept the trajectory that has been sold to us. And by stepping back, we open the door to paths that lead toward greater stability and satisfaction, no matter how the larger economy evolves. The patterns of surveillance and control that accelerated during the digital boom have made it clear that convenience often comes with strings attached that tighten over time as features become requirements and opt outs disappear under the pressure of standardization. And this realization prompts more individuals to audit their tech use and eliminate what no longer serves them, focusing instead on tools that enhance capability without demanding constant connectivity or data surrender. In practical terms, this means prioritizing repairable hardware that can be maintained locally over disposable gadgets tied to proprietary ecosystems, and the difference in longevity and cost savings reinforces the wisdom of the choice while building mechanical literacy that has broader applications in everyday problem solving. Communities benefit as these skills spread through informal teaching, reducing overall waste and fostering a culture of stewardship over consumption that stands in contrast to the planned obsolescence baked into much of the modern consumer landscape. The economic realities that have been masked by the artificial intelligence story are forcing a reevaluation of priorities across society, because when job security feels elusive and costs keep climbing, the appeal of minimizing monthly outflows through ownership and self provision becomes undeniable. And this shift is happening not through top down directives, but through millions of personal calculations that favor long term security over short term ease. The raw edge comes in recognizing that the systems we have relied on are showing their age and limitations, and the response is to build parallel capabilities that do not depend on their continued smooth functioning. Whether that means storing food reserves, learning basic first aid, or maintaining vehicles with mechanical rather than electronic controls that are less prone to remote interference or expensive dealer only repairs. Each of these steps contributes to a personal and collective resilience that makes the broader challenges feel more manageable and less overwhelming, because the foundation is under individual control rather than subject to external volatility. As this resilience grows, the narrative around progress begins to change, because success is measured less by how much is consumed or how connected one is, and more by how well one can sustain and adapt using available resources. And this redefinition spreads organically as people share their experiences and results, inspiring others to explore similar paths without pressure or hype. The sobering truth is that the digital age delivered many benefits, but at the cost of certain freedoms and capabilities that are now being reclaimed through deliberate choices. And the hybrid world emerging from this reclamation offers the best of both eras, where innovation serves human scale living instead of replacing it entirely. This balanced approach is what sustains the movement through economic headwinds, because it delivers tangible improvements in daily life that no amount of marketing can fake. And the quiet revolution continues, one household and community at a time, building toward a future defined by greater independence and authenticity. You can see the momentum in the way conversations turn toward practical solutions rather than complaints about the system. Because once people experience the benefits of reduced dependence, the focus shifts to refining and expanding those practices. And this positive reinforcement keeps the shift going, even as official channels continue to push the artificial intelligence and endless growth stories that feel increasingly disconnected from ground level realities. The authoritative view is that this grassroots evolution represents the most viable path forward, because it is rooted in human nature and proven methods rather than untested promises. And the raw satisfaction it brings is the ultimate proof that the walk away is not a retreat, but an advance toward a more sustainable and fulfilling way of living. The interconnected nature of these changes means that improvements in one area, like food security or information control, spill over into others, creating synergies that amplify the overall sense of empowerment. And this compounding effect is what makes the movement so enduring, because each gain encourages further steps without requiring massive upfront investment or specialized knowledge beyond what can be learned through doing and sharing. Families that embrace this path find themselves better equipped for whatever comes next, whether economic fluctuations or technological shifts, because their baseline is self directed and adaptable rather than locked into external dependencies that can change rules or prices without notice. The future being built is one where ordinary people hold more of the cards through their own efforts and choices, and that quiet power shift here is the most sobering and hopeful development in a time when so much else feels uncertain. This ongoing transformation underscores that the real story is not about machines taking over, but about people taking back control in ways that honor both tradition and thoughtful innovation. And as more join the ranks, The collective impact reshapes expectations for what a good life looks like in the decades ahead, free from the illusions that once dominated the digital landscape. The relaxed truth shared among those who have made the transition is that life feels fuller when it is lived on terms that prioritize substance over spectacle and self reliance over convenience. And that feeling is the ultimate wake up call, proving that the choices being made now are leading towards something more solid and rewarding than the path we were on before. The relaxed truth shared among those who have made the transition is that life feels fuller when it is lived on terms that prioritize substance over spectacle and self reliance over convenience. And that feeling is the ultimate wake up call, proving that the choices being made now are leading towards something more solid and rewarding than the path we were on before. Because once you break free from the digital tether, the mind begins to heal in profound ways that no productivity app or wellness trend could ever replicate, as the constant barrage of notifications and algorithm driven distractions fades away, leaving behind a clarity that allows thoughts to unfold at their own natural pace without the pressure of instant replies or endless comparisons that once fragmented every waking hour into scattered pieces of attention. You start to notice how the brain, which had been trained to crave quick hits of validation from likes and comments, begins to settle into deeper states of focus where reading a physical book or working with your hands on a project feels genuinely absorbing rather than a chore interrupted by the urge to check a screen. And this restoration of sustained concentration ripples outward into every part of daily existence, making it easier to solve problems creatively and to engage with people around you in conversations that actually go somewhere meaningful instead of skimming the surface like so many online exchanges that dissolve as soon as the device is set down. The sobering reality here is that years of exposure to the modern digital environment had quietly eroded the capacity for patience and introspection, turning what should be ordinary moments of boredom into sources of anxiety that demanded immediate stimulation. But as people step away and allow those empty spaces to exist again, they rediscover the creative spark that comes from unstructured time, where ideas can simmer and combine in unexpected ways, leading to personal projects like building furniture from reclaimed materials or experimenting with recipes using ingredients grown locally that bring a sense of accomplishment far more lasting than any virtual achievement unlocked through an app. This revival of hands on creativity is not some nostalgic throwback, but a direct counter to the way centralized platforms had conditioned folks to consume rather than create, outsourcing their imagination to influencers and algorithms that dictated what was worth pursuing. And now, with that influence diminished, individuals are free to explore skills passed down through generations or newly invented in small workshops where trial and error teaches resilience and ingenuity in ways that screens never could, replicating the kind of practical knowledge that once defined human progress before everything got funneled through corporate filters designed to keep users dependent and passive. The subscription fatigue that has built up over the past decade reveals itself as one of the most insidious traps of the convenience economy. Because what started as affordable access to music, movies, and shows gradually morphed into a web of overlapping fees that demanded more each month while delivering less value as content libraries shrank behind paywalls and algorithms pushed repetitive recommendations that felt increasingly hollow, leaving families staring at bills that rivaled utility costs for things they did not even own in the end. And this exhaustion with the model pushes people toward owning their entertainment outright through physical collections or local storage solutions that eliminate the monthly drain and restore a sense of permanence to leisure time. You see the raw impact when households calculate how much they have spent over years on streaming services that could have gone toward tools or materials for self sufficient projects. And the realization hits hard that the promised ease was really a slow transfer of wealth and control from individuals to distant corporations that could raise prices or alter terms without notice, forcing users into a cycle of endless upgrading just to keep up with features that were once standard. This pattern extends beyond entertainment into everyday services, where apps for transportation, food delivery, and even basic banking started free or low cost, but evolved into layered subscription tiers that locked in users through habit and then squeezed them with surcharges and data requirements, turning what felt like modernization into a form of economic tethering that many are now cutting loose by returning to cash transactions, walking or biking for short trips, and preparing meals from scratch with ingredients sourced directly from farms or markets that operate outside the delivery app ecosystem. The authoritative truth is that this fatigue is accelerating because the cumulative cost, both financial and mental, has become unsustainable in an economy where real wages have not kept pace with the proliferation of these digital necessities. And the walk away represents a collective decision to reclaim that spending power for things that build long term security rather than temporary conveniences that evaporate when the next billing cycle arrives. Local economies are springing up in neighborhoods and small towns as more people embrace barter and skill sharing networks that bypass the corporate middlemen entirely, allowing individuals to trade plumbing repairs for fresh produce or carpentry work for childcare in arrangements based on mutual trust and immediate value rather than processed through platforms that take percentages and log every detail for future monetization or oversight. These systems thrive because they restore the human element to exchange, where a handshake and a conversation carry more weight than an online rating, and they expand naturally as participants discover untapped talents in their communities, like someone who knows how to maintain older vehicles, teaching others in return for help with gardening or preserving harvests, which creates a web of interdependence that strengthens resilience against the larger economic downturn by keeping resources circulating locally instead of leaking out to distant headquarters. The storytelling pace of these exchanges feels alive and grounded because they happen face to face, where stories get swapped alongside goods and knowledge, turning simple trades into opportunities for learning about everything from weather patterns that affect crops to historical methods of food storage that have proven reliable through past hard times. And this oral tradition keeps practical wisdom alive in ways that digital archives never quite capture, since they lack the context and personal connection that make the information stick. As these networks mature, they begin to influence broader community decisions, like advocating for shared spaces where tools and equipment can be maintained collectively, reducing the need for each household to shoulder the full cost of ownership, and fostering a culture where cooperation is the default rather than competition for scarce resources, which stands in stark contrast to the isolated consumer model that dominated the height of the online era. Energy independence takes on a practical shape when folks start incorporating manual or small scale solutions that draw from both traditional methods and selective modern adaptations, such as hand cranked devices for basic tasks or compact solar arrays paired with battery storage that powers essential offline equipment without tying users to fluctuating utility rates or grid vulnerabilities that have exposed themselves during recent disruptions caused by weather or infrastructure strain. The wake up comes when you calculate the freedom gained from reducing reliance on centralized power sources that can be subject to rolling blackouts or price hikes driven by policy and market forces far removed from local realities. And this shift encourages experimentation with wind generators or even pedal powered setups for charging personal devices, keeping the focus on self contained systems that can be repaired with basic mechanical knowledge rather than specialized parts available only through authorized dealers. Food self sufficiency follows a similar path as gardens expand from hobby plots into serious sources of nutrition where families learn to rotate crops, companion plant, and preserve surpluses through methods like fermentation or root cellaring that require no electricity and deliver flavors and nutrients superior to anything shipped across continents and stored in warehouses before reaching supermarket shelves. This approach not only cuts grocery expenses that have risen steadily amid the economic pressures, but also reconnects people with seasonal rhythms, teaching patience and foresight as they plan harvest months in advance, which builds a mindset of preparedness that spills over into other areas of life, making the overall depression feel less daunting because basic needs are increasingly met through personal effort rather than vulnerable supply chains. Professions that demand real world presence and judgment continue to stand firm against any notion of replacement because in healthcare doctors and nurses navigate the complexities of patient interactions where symptoms must be read through conversation, physical examination, and intuitive understanding of human variability that no data set can fully encompass, especially when emotional factors or rare conditions come into play, requiring on the spot adaptations and ethical decisions that go beyond pattern recognition. Educators similarly provide the mentorship and inspiration that guide students through challenges, fostering critical thinking and social skills in classroom settings where group dynamics and individual breakthroughs happen live and cannot be simulated effectively through remote interfaces that lack the subtle cues of body language and immediate feedback essential for genuine learning. Trades like plumbing, electrical work, and construction demand physical dexterity and problem solving in unpredictable environments where variables such as building age, material quality, or site specific obstacles require experienced hands to improvise safely and efficiently, ensuring structures stand the test of time rather than failing due to overlooked details that algorithms might miss in their generalized models. These fields thrive because they are rooted in accountability, where the professional stands behind the work in person and clients can see the results directly, which builds trust that no virtual assistant could ever earn. And as the economy tightens, the demand for such skilled labor only grows since infrastructure repairs and maintenance cannot be outsourced indefinitely without visible consequences that affect daily life for everyone. The long term societal shifts emerging from this movement point toward a world where generations reconnect through shared knowledge transfer as older family members teach younger ones the basics of repair gardening and resource management, creating a continuity that had been interrupted by decades of specialization and digital isolation, where skills were assumed to be handled by experts or machines. This revival strengthens family bonds and community ties because the learning happens in real time during joint projects like repairing a roof or canning vegetables, which passes down not just techniques, but values of patience, resourcefulness, and independence that counter the instant gratification culture that left so many feeling unprepared for setbacks. The rhetorical question that lingers is why settle for a life of rented conveniences and monitored activities when the alternative offers ownership of your time data and outcomes in a way that feels authentically human? And the answer becomes clear with each person who makes the switch, realizing that freedom from the psyop of artificial intelligence hype means facing the economic truths head on while building buffers that protect against them rather than waiting passively for promised technological fixes that never fully materialize. Health restoration follows naturally as reduced screen exposure leads to better sleep patterns, more physical activity from hands on tasks, and improved mental well being through meaningful accomplishments that release satisfaction hormones far more effectively than the fleeting dopamine from social media validation. Political and personal freedom angles of decentralization become evident when you recognize that opting out of centralized systems removes leverage points that governments or corporations could use to influence behavior through access restrictions or data driven profiling, allowing individuals to express ideas and conduct transactions without fear of repercussions tied to digital footprints that can be tracked, aggregated, and acted upon from afar. This independence fosters a renewed sense of agency where people engage in local governance or advocacy with the confidence that comes from not being dependent on the very structures they might critique. And it encourages innovation in everything from alternative currencies to community protocols that prioritize privacy and consent over top down control. The hybrid future taking shape blends these elements into a lifestyle that is neither fully primitive nor blindly futuristic, but thoughtfully selective, where older, durable methods provide the backbone and targeted innovations like efficient manual tools or localized power sources enhance capability without introducing new vulnerabilities. And this balance ensures that as economic conditions evolve, the foundation remains solid because it is built on human scale decisions rather than fragile global dependencies. You can feel the momentum building as these practices spread through word of mouth and practical demonstrations, where one household shows another how to set up a rainwater collection system or maintain a wood burning stove for heating, which inspires further adoption and creates a ripple effect that gradually reshapes neighborhoods into more self contained units capable of weathering prolonged periods of scarcity or instability without collapsing. The sobering wake up call is that the artificial intelligence narrative was always meant to distract from these underlying fragilities in the job market and economic structure by suggesting that the solution lies in more technology rather than less dependence on it. And by walking away, people are essentially calling the bluff, exposing the psyop for what it is, while forging paths that deliver real results in the form of lower stress, greater security, and a deeper connection to the tangible world that no virtual simulation could ever provide. Creativity flourishes further in this environment as the absence of constant digital input allows the imagination to draw from internal sources and real world observations, leading to original art, music, or inventions that reflect personal experience rather than trending templates pushed by recommendation engines. And this authenticity resonates because it comes from a place of 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 genuine engagement unfiltered by corporate curation. The parallels to historical tech shifts remind us that societies have navigated similar transitions before, when new tools promised to solve all problems, but ultimately required humans to adapt by integrating them selectively while preserving core capabilities that ensured survival and progress through uncertain times. And today, the same principle applies as the walkaway movement draws on that wisdom to create a modern version of resilience that honors the past without rejecting useful advances. Family resilience grows through these shared experiences as children observe and participate in the daily rhythms of self provision, learning early that effort yields results and that resources are finite yet manageable with planning, which instills a sense of stewardship and confidence that will serve them well, regardless of future economic landscapes. The raw authoritative perspective is that this is not a temporary trend, but a necessary evolution driven by the failures of the centralized model to deliver on its promises of endless growth and effortless living. And as more people experience the tangible benefits, the collective shift accelerates, creating a new normal where independence is valued over integration into systems that have shown themselves to be unreliable and extractive over time. In the end, the choices being made reflect a straightforward recognition that true progress lies in aligning daily life with principles of ownership, privacy, and self direction, which in turn exposes the economic depression for what it is, while equipping individuals and communities to navigate it with dignity and effectiveness, rather than waiting for external saviors or technological miracles that have yet to prove their worth in delivering broad based prosperity. This path forward offers a sobering yet hopeful vision where the PSYOP loses its power because people have stepped outside its influence and built lives that stand on their own terms, blending the reliability of time tested methods with the ingenuity of selective innovation to create something enduring and fulfilling that no amount of hype can undermine or replace. The relaxed conversations happening in living rooms and backyards now focus on what works, what lasts, and what truly adds value, which keeps the movement grounded and expanding, one deliberate step at a time, as the larger world continues to grapple with the realities it has tried so hard to obscure behind layers of digital distraction and optimistic forecasts that no longer hold up under close examination. If you have stuck with this the whole way through and made it to the end, then you are part of the 1 hour gang. And that means you have what it takes to face hard truths without flinching, because most people bail out long before they hear the full picture. But you stayed, and that says something real about your willingness to look the mess square in the eye and keep going anyway. If you are enjoying these Angry Guy videos and you want to show some support, you can buy me a Red Bull with a one-time gift or via a monthly pledge by using the link in the description of the video. Tell me what you think about everything we just laid out here. Do you agree that the artificial intelligence push is mostly a psyop designed to cover up the deep economic depression we have been living through while people quietly walk away from the whole centralized tech trap and start building lives that actually belong to them again? Or do you see it differently? Because the raw truth is that the shift is already happening all around us. And the more we talk about it, the clearer it gets for everyone involved. So drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you stand on this, because real conversation is how we cut through the noise and figure out what comes next for all of us. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.